What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about foods to avoid when you're doing the Candida diet. I personally did the diet over a year ago and I was able to cure my Candida overgrowth, so I just wanted to share some foods that I personally avoided. I'm not saying that you have to avoid all these foods as well. This is just what helped me in my journey. I'm not a doctor or specialist or anything like that. I'm really just speaking to some things that I've done research on and just my personal experience. Just keep that in mind when you're watching the video. You don't necessarily have to do everything that I did. I did the Candida cleanse for about 4 months, but I also was pretty restricted on my diet and had a more paleo-based diet for like a year leading up to that 4 months of like being really strict. So just keep that in mind. You might have to do like a 2-month cleanse, 4-month cleanse. Some people even do a 6-month cleanse if it's like very severe, but I was able to pretty much get rid of it after 4 months, 4-ish months. First, I'm going to be talking about foods that everyone should absolutely avoid no matter what stage of the Candida overgrowth that you have. You should definitely avoid these foods. Those foods are refined sugars, dairy, gluten, alcohol, and some processed foods. So basically when you're doing the Candida cleanse, you're wanting to not feed the Candida overgrowth. You already have that overgrowth in your body. You don't want to add even more fuel to the fire, literally. Candida loves sugar. Sugar you can really find in so many products. It's in a lot of your condiments, a lot of your sauces. It's just hidden in everything, which is really discouraging. So definitely encourage you to, if you are buying something that's packaged, always look at the ingredients and just see what's in it. See if there's any kind of hidden sugars in there. And another note on sugar is that I also avoided fructose as well. So most fruits I avoided. I avoided maple syrup. I avoided honey. I will say for honey, I did have it every once in a while. It wouldn't be like a weekly thing or anything, but if I wanted to bake something and add a little honey into it, maybe your body can't handle that. So just really pay attention to how your body is feeling and reacting and what your cravings are. For the fruit part of it, I avoided the high sugar fruits. So the mango, pineapple, bananas, things like that that are like really high in sugar, I did avoid those. If I wanted something sweet, I went for like berries, so blueberries, raspberries, strawberries. But yeah, I just avoided as much sugar as I can during the whole cleanse. I'm still pretty much avoiding sugar. Obviously, I'm not as strict as I was during the Candida cleanse, but I'm definitely still very cautious about my sugar intake. Definitely avoided gluten as well. I avoided all grains, actually. I avoided oats, wheat, barley, rye, rice. I avoided all those things. I did have quinoa every once in a while. I had buckwheat every once in a while. And there's definitely like some food alternatives that you can use if you're like baking. So you can have like almond flour, cassava flour, coconut flour, things like that. I am gonna make a video just dedicated on foods that you can have and good alternatives for the diet. So you should definitely subscribe if you wanna see that video in the future. And I do wanna touch on alcohol. You definitely need to avoid alcohol during this cleanse. If you are gonna have a drink, I would recommend having something that's like a cleaner alcohol like gin and tequila, but you really want to be avoiding this, and you definitely don't want to be over consuming alcohol during this time. And I know that's very difficult. It was very difficult for me. Alcohol is also a very cultural and social aspect of living. If you go to a party, if you see friends, a group of people, usually there's alcohol. So it is a little bit challenging to avoid, but now they make really good beer alternatives, really good mocktails. There's definitely some things that you can do to kind of help with that, but you definitely do want to avoid alcohol because it just turns straight to sugar. It'll feed the yeast, and right now you want to do everything that you can to avoid feeding the yeast. So I'm going to go into a little bit more debatable aspects of the Candida cleanse and foods to avoid, and the first being caffeine. So I personally am not a huge coffee drinker, so this wasn't like too difficult for me, but I know a lot of people drink coffee and like need coffee. So caffeine, so this is even like your green tea too, which I wasn't honestly too strict about. Sometimes I would still have a matcha. I know this might be difficult for some people. So it can be acidic to the body, which Candida thrives in acidic environments, so that's something to be aware of. And it can also raise your blood sugar levels, so it's just something to be aware of. I would definitely cut back if you're drinking coffee. If you are drinking coffee, make sure that it has been tested for mold and that it's organic and things like that. That's just like the best quality coffee that you can be drinking. The next thing I'm gonna be talking about is you wanna be avoiding poor quality meat. So this is your meat that is not 100% grass-fed, not pasture-raised. This is your meat where like the animal has been treated poorly, might have been fed antibiotics, might have been given hormones. When you're eating that meat, you're eating what that animal ate. You're also ingesting that energy of the meat, and this is gonna be like a little woo-woo, but basically if that animal had a very hard life, stressful life, and was traumatized, kept in a cage, was not treated well, and you're eating the meat, it doesn't really serve your body. This is something that you should do even when you're not doing the Candida cleanse, but definitely during this time I would invest in good quality meat. So you want to be looking for 100% grass-fed, pasture-raised, organic, things like that. Like I said, I'm going to do a video on like some other tips on what to get. But yeah, poor quality meat you definitely want to avoid because you don't really know what they've been fed. You don't know how their living situation was. It can definitely harm the Candida overgrowth. Okay, I personally avoided all beans and legumes. And I know if you're like vegan, this might not be ideal for you because I know a lot of vegans get their protein source from beans and legumes, but I personally avoided them because they're kind of high in starch, and then the legumes are high in lectins, which is another thing that people tend to avoid when they're doing the Candida cleanse. But I mean, if you are vegan or someone who eats a lot of legumes, I would just have them like maybe once or twice a week. The book that I was reading, the 90-Day Candida Cure, they recommended avoiding these things for 2 months. Totally up to you. It really just depends on how your body is feeling and your symptoms. So the next thing I'm gonna be talking about is high starchy foods. So this is like your potatoes, your beans, your peas. I personally had sweet potatoes, but I didn't have regular potatoes. Potatoes in general convert very rapidly into sugar, which obviously feeds the yeast. You definitely want to avoid or at least minimize your consumption of like high starchy vegetables. Just to be aware of that, if you're someone that's eating a lot of potatoes or like pumpkin and squash and things like that, it can be harming you rather than serving you. So just keep that in mind when you're eating and preparing your food. Mushrooms is another thing that I avoided. They can be really high in mold. They can also make you have an allergy response. So I just personally avoided altogether. And that leads me to my next point is just high mold foods in general I avoided. This especially is common in nuts. So I avoided peanuts, which can be really high in mold, pistachios. Those are some nuts that I definitely avoided. You don't want to be like ingesting something that can be contaminated with mold. And mold is super toxic to the body, and you're already having a Candida overgrowth, so your body is already has these kind of toxins in them. You don't want to overload them with more toxins, if that makes sense. I also avoided fermented foods for the most part. This is a little bit debatable in this world because fermented food can be really beneficial for your gut bacteria, and you can even see online a lot of people are recommending you eating fermented food like sauerkraut, kimchi, tempeh, kombucha, things like that. I personally didn't have that the first 2 months of my cleanse. After that, I did started to incorporate some kimchi and sauerkraut, but just a little bit, like literally a tablespoon, not very much at all. So I just avoided it for the first 2 months of my cleanse. Yeah, it's something that I would recommend you having maybe after you're seeing a lot of results, and maybe even after your cleanse altogether, because it's good to replenish the gut flora, but during this time you're really just trying to kill off the Candida and not feed it any kind of like sugar or fermented foods. So just to give a rundown of everything I discussed, I avoided alcohol, refined sugars, most fructose sugars, gluten, a lot of processed foods, poor quality meat, grains, caffeine, beans and legumes, fermented foods, mushrooms, nuts that can be high in mold like peanuts, pistachios, high starchy vegetables, potatoes and peas and beans, and dairy. Those are all the things that I personally avoided. Like I said, you don't have to avoid all these foods. It really just depends on you and how bad your Candida overgrowth is. And you might even have to eliminate more foods, or you might not have to eliminate so many. So just keep that in mind. I know it's kind of a lot of information, but I will say if you just cut out sugar, dairy, grains, gluten, alcohol, and most processed foods, you're gonna feel so much better. Obviously with the cleanse, you are more restricted in different areas like the vegetables, mushrooms, caffeine, fermented foods, things like that. But just keep in mind that this is not forever. It's a short amount of time, and your body is really gonna thank you once you start avoiding these foods. You're just gonna feel so much better when that Candida overgrowth is dying off and is minimizing. So just keep that in mind and don't get too discouraged. I do have a lot of other videos about the Candida overgrowth and exactly how I cured it. So definitely check them out. I'll link them up here and down below for you guys. I will be doing another videos of foods that you should incorporate during the cleanse. So definitely subscribe to see that video. Give this video a like if you liked it, if this helped you out. I really hope it did. I'm so thankful that you're here watching this, and I encourage you to keep trying and doing your best. I know it can be really hard during the Candida cleanse. So yeah, definitely check out my other videos because those are a lot more in depth on specific things that I did during the cleanse. But thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.